Hey everyone, welcome to the Trust, Transparency, and Tarot Cards webinar hosted by Artefact. We're so excited to do this today and just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come chat with us. We're just really looking forward to this. My name is Hannah. I work in marketing communications here at Artefact, and I teamed up with the two presenters you're going to hear from today, as well as some of our internal design staff here to actually create the Tarot Cards of Tech. It was definitely our baby and something we were really excited about. We worked on it for I think almost 6 months, and then we released it out into the world, and we were just so blown away and really honored by the reception that it got. I think most of you here are probably here today because you did download the cards or you saw them. So just wanted to say thank you for that. And if you haven't, if you're not aware, if you don't know how you ended up here, you don't know what the tarot cards are, they are this tool that we created at Artefact. And the idea is that, you know, with the concept of a tarot card, it gets you in the mindset of thinking about the future. And we were really thinking about what are better questions that tech companies can be asking themselves to better think through outcomes, unintended consequences, and even potential opportunity that might go unexplored if we don't think longer term and bigger picture about the impact our products have in areas of equity, access, scale, disruption, and usage as well. So we created these cards, and you're going to hear a little bit more about the actual thinking around them today and the mindset that they're kind of grounded in. And hopefully you're going to walk away with kind of an expanded view of the thinking that these kind of originate from. But before I kick it over to your presenters, forgive me if I do a brief infomercial moment, if I can do a brief plug and go kind of Vanna White on you, which is that we released these as a free download, and we got so much response in social media. People are emailing us saying, hey, where can I get the actual premium deck? As you can see, it's like this nice, beautiful, shiny, we joke this is 24 karat gold. It's not, but it's really nice premium deck of cards that come with this kind of, we have this gold on the back. They're really thick. They're really gorgeous. So many people actually wanted to get their hands on these that we are selling a limited edition run of these premium decks, and all of the proceeds are benefiting this organization in King County, Washington, that does STEM and STEAM education for opportunity, you know, children of opportunity here in our county. And it's this amazing organization. So all the money from the sale of these cards is going to this organization called TAF, the Technology Access Foundation. So after the webinar today, if you are interested in getting your hands on this really nice deck of cards, we have links. It's in the YouTube channel. We will make sure you have access to that, and we would just really appreciate your support there. So now I'm going to kick it over to your webinar hosts. We've got Sheryl Cababa, who's the executive creative director here at Artefact, and Jeff Turkelson, who is a senior design researcher and strategist. And they have been kind of leading the internal team on a lot of the thinking that kind of led up to these cards, and they were really definitely the partners in creating these cards. And before they get started, just a quick note on format. They're going to present for about 20 minutes today, and they're going to have a deck which we will make an abbreviated version available to you to download once the webinar is over. So if you see any slides or anything like that, we'll make sure that you get those. And then at about 20 minutes in, 25 minutes in, we'll start to do a 15-20 minute Q&A section. So while they present, I'll be looking at all the questions you're sending in, and I'm going to try to surface as many of those as possible during the Q&A section. So just know that we will get there, and we will answer all of those questions and everything once we're there. I think that about brings us up to the presenting time. So I'm going to kick it over to Sheryl and Jeff. And as I said, if you have any questions, let us know. And this is our first ever webinar, so bear with us if we encounter any issues. I don't think we will, but we're here to figure it out. So Sheryl and Jeff, are you guys ready?
Yeah, we're ready. So we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Sheryl Cababa. I'm an executive creative director here at Artefact. And my job here is to oversee projects. And one of the things that I've been working on is really up-leveling our practice as it applies to design and thinking about how not only we use human-centered design in our practice, but we think about how we can push the design practice a little bit so that we can think more about outcomes and unintended consequences.
My name is Jeff Turkelson. I'm a design researcher here at Artefact. What that means is I do user research to better inform our product development. I talk with users, we observe users in the context of their lives, we get feedback from users on designs and prototypes. And beyond that, the insight and strategy team in which I'm a part of, we also look at problems from a more systemic level, what it looks like in terms of human systems and how a given design can affect organizations beyond just the individual user.
Cool. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. And as Hannah mentioned, we'll go through the presentation and then we'll take questions from you guys after it. Hannah, can you see your screen? Just making sure. Okay, cool. So we at Artefact think that designers have a responsibility towards thinking about the outcomes of our work. And we recognize that we can use the tools at our disposal, which is design, technology, and innovation to lead to a better future. We think one of the things that's happening right now and is really sort of hitting a wall within the tech industry is that there's a lot of discussion around how we're designing technology and what it means for not just our users, but for society at large. I think what's happening is that we're eroding trust, not only with our users, but just with people who know about the companies and products, the companies that we work with and the products that we design. So you can see here that out of the big 5 tech companies, that fewer than half of people polled in this particular survey actually trust those companies anymore. And this is before all of the Cambridge Analytica stuff broke. So I'm sure like the numbers are even worse. So what we think we need to do is to remember our role as user advocates. I think what's happened in design is we've always considered ourselves user advocates, but as design has more progressively gotten that seat at the table within technology companies, it feels a little bit like we've forgotten it because we're sort of put in the position of helping these companies achieve their economic incentives, which are often at odds with what users actually need. So we feel like we need to be more outcomes focused in our practice, and that user experience design as an approach is no longer enough, like simply thinking about the direct benefit of how somebody uses the products that we design. So I can talk a little bit about how we've been thinking about this as a practice. And just to go back to how design in general has been approached over the last century, I think we can think about the initial need as designing the product. So designing things that are appealing and easy to use. I sometimes think of the Brown radio as a good example of this. It's a beautiful product, and it's something that was just on its own merit is easy to use for people and fulfilled on its promise of that. We then, especially as we started thinking about digital experiences, started considering the experience. So designing things that create a desired experience. So that could mean something that has multiple touch points, both digital and analog. I like to use the example of banking experiences have multiple touch points. So now we have digital platforms when you interact with your bank, but you can also interact with customer service representatives. You can also interact with the bank branch, and all of these things orchestrated together constitute an experience. And so you're a customer experiencing that. I think now we need to extend our thinking as designers to consider first and foremost the outcomes of what we do. So we design things that contribute to desired outcomes beyond direct benefits of use. And the importance of that last part of the phrase is that when we are designing experiences, we're just thinking about how somebody uses our products and services directly. Now we have to think about the side side effects of the things that we design, the implications of the things that we design, and how it affects society at large and at scale.
And one thing to add here, the bulk of professional design work that we see today is focused on the first two circles of designing products and designing experiences with less explicit intention toward the outcomes.
That's exactly right. I think that's one of the reasons, like, as a practice, we started thinking that there's kind of a hole in the practice. Mm-hmm. We've gotten really good at doing UX and doing it really, really well, maybe too well. I think you could actually think of it as part of the problem. So essentially, thinking about in an outcomes-focused design way is understanding outcomes is what happens when your design is out in the world and beyond your control. So this screen in the background is from an ad that Airbnb ran about acceptance, as they're right now facing down lawsuits about discrimination by way of their platform. This is an unintended consequence that they failed to anticipate. So if we think about that three-level approach, we can think about their product as, let's say, the digital platform on which you can use their service. This is just one touch point. We think about the experience as what happens when you use that touch point alongside with, like, the actual analog experience of going and staying in an Airbnb or hosting an Airbnb. And then now, what we would like designers to be really focused on is what is the potential outcome of their work. So in the upper right-hand corner, you see some good and intended outcomes, like people interacting with people they might not otherwise interact with. That photo is from a New York Times story about Airbnb. But then the bottom two images are about, one, the impact that Airbnb has had on cities, the price of rent in cities, and the impact on the hospitality industry. And then in the bottom quadrant, you see that there's some statistics around how people are discriminated against on this platform that is really designed around trusting people who are most like you. So African-American guests on Airbnb are 16% less likely to be accepted than identical guests with white names. This is something that they're now grappling with now that their product operates at such a scale and is out in the world. It's something that they definitely could have anticipated a little bit better than they have. So we think good design begins with asking the right questions. Essentially, what do we want to happen when our design is out in the world?
And that's why we developed the tarot cards, to help us better answer those questions. The tarot cards of tech help organizations think through the possible outcomes of their products, services, initiatives, and activities. I want to stress here that while we developed these as a design consultancy primarily focused on products and digital experiences, the tarot cards of tech can be useful when considering non-product interventions in the world, programs, initiatives, services, things that are completely intangible. All those things make a difference in the world. They have an impact. And so there are outcomes that you can consider, and the tarot cards of tech can help you work through those problems.
So let's take an example from tech really quickly, just so that we can provide an example that people can relate to that explains how the prompts work. So let's take our time machine back to 2007 when the iPhone first came out. Here's Steve Jobs presenting it that year. And one of the things that was really successful about it is that it was a new kind of experience for an existing form factor. So it wasn't just that the iPhone had a new kind of touch screen or had an internet browser that wasn't crippled or was a music and movie player and a camera. It's that it appeared to do all those things well and beautifully at the same time. So what it really fulfilled on was that amazing user experience, and they really nailed it. They got it right. And basically it changed the nature of how we interact with digital products.
You know, this released when I was an industrial design student, and one of my friends, a colleague of mine, said that design is dead. And in a way he was right, but in a way he was wrong, given that now our challenge as designers is to think about the impact that such products can have and not just the physical form factor.
God, your friend was really prescient. What have been the unintended consequences of this success is the question we're all asking now, and there have been many. So this is from an article last year that ran in The Atlantic that really looked at, now we have 10 years, basically we have some longitudinal data about how the smartphone has affected a generation of users who are basically smartphone native, and what the conclusions have been drawn, or what we're hearing more and more about, is that it is actually making teenagers lonely and sad, and that as a generation, they're on the brink of a mental health crisis. So all of these things that we thought were great from an experience level, kind of collectively and as an outcome, are having a negative impact on populations. We also have designers of those original products now having regrets about how they've set out to design those very products. I think there's basically, for the last at least 5 years, if not 10 years, a lot of digital designers have been using the Fogg behavioral model, and which we've seen works maybe too well as it applies to product design.
That's a model for designing for behavior change.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Thank you. And so you have the like button based on those principles. You have the way Instagram randomizes scrolling based on those principles. And what we find is that it actually has a similar effect in the long run, as organizations like the Center for Humane Tech point out, as slot machines and things that are basically designed for addiction. So those were all things that made user engagement really strong, and that often is the goal of good user experience design. But we feel that now we're at a point where it's really important for design teams to try to anticipate how things could go wrong. So let's imagine if the design team at Apple, maybe not at the inception of the iPhone, but as they recognized its popularity, went back and used a prompt like this one from our Tarot Cards of Tech, which is the siren. What would using your product too much look like? What design decisions might they have considered? What's interesting is that just last month, the new version of iOS now has tools to help you balance your digital usage. So one of the prompts on our tarot card is, how does your product encourage users to engage, and how does it make it easy to disconnect? You now see distinctions in how iOS treats notifications. So you can say, I want notifications just from people, and I don't want notifications from tools or games. Another prompt is, how does your product respect people's boundaries and the other parts of their lives? There's this great feature now called downtime, which allows you to actually step away from the screen to do things in real life. And lastly, in what situations might it be inappropriate or distracting to use your product? We've had so many casualties from people texting while driving, and yet features like do not disturb while driving have just recently been coming out. And this is something that we feel could have been anticipated earlier.
So again, we're not trying to say that Apple could have predicted everything that was going to happen when they launched the iPhone and baked in all of those preventative measures right from the inception. But we feel that with these tarot cards of tech, they could have possibly identified these challenges earlier. They would have been more sensitive to those weaker indications of the problems as they were emerging, perhaps 5 years earlier, and developed an intervention that was more preventative than reactive. So using tarot cards in your organization, I can walk you through how we use tarot cards within Artefact. When we use tarot cards, it's best to use tarot cards once you have some idea for a solution at various phases, but whether it's a bunch of different sketches on a whiteboard or whether you have an existing product that you're trying to evaluate for the next round of iteration. It's having the idea as the point of focus to ask these questions about. And the tarot cards were designed to be used by teams, although they can certainly be useful as an individual exercise. We use tarot cards mostly when we're working with clients toward the beginning of a client relationship, the kickoff, or a meeting soon thereafter, where we work with the client in small groups. We give each participant 1 to 3 cards. We spend 5 minutes jotting down answers to those questions. Again, if it's a larger group, then you can have people work in teams. There's a lot of variances to how you can set up a group discussion. But then after 5 or 10 minutes to think through these questions that you've written down, you come back together as a group and discuss and add on, allowing the group to touch on each individual card. This is one way to do it, although there's many other ways to use tarot cards in a group. As I mentioned, you could have teams of teams. If you have a very large group, you'd have people break out and maybe you give each team a whole set and see what happens between different groups, if there's differences, if there's variances. As a facilitator, you could pre-select some of the most pertinent or interesting cards and give those to people and have a bit more of a curated deep dive. And as I mentioned, you can also use tarot cards as in an individual reflection. I know I personally love to think about societal consequences to technology just on my own time. So the tarot cards are one tool that can help me do that.
We're constantly thinking about that at Artefact.
Yeah.
As a hobby.
Yeah. And because the tarot cards can be a very quick exercise, even as much as just 20 to 30 minutes, you can definitely mix this in with other activities during a larger meeting or workshop. So it's not like a 4-hour exercise, or it doesn't have to be. Now, the output of the tarot card exercise, what it helps you do is it helps you identify potential risks. Again, if you're Apple, you're not predicting the future about what will happen, but you're more conscious of what could go wrong and what you need to pay closer attention toward and look for those weak indicators of it happening. You can use the discussion that results from the tarot card to inform a research plan, whether that's talking with users or doing secondary research into potential issues. What lines of inquiry should we pursue based on the possibilities of how our design impacts the world? You can also use the output of the tarot card discussion to more directly inform your design and your design principles. If you know that something like, let's say, privacy is definitely going to be a concern based on your discussion, then you can make that a principle to safeguard because of the implications to the user. And more broadly, after a tarot card exercise, we're hoping that the team has a better understanding of how whatever they're designing is going to impact the world, how it relates to people's lives, their personal lives, their professional lives, transit. There's many different facets of life, and we don't always make the connections between our product, our intervention, and all those other things that are part of our daily lives. Here's an example of when we used tarot cards recently on a project. We were working with a client on a possible, augmented reality headset, and one of the team members was given the catalyst card. How might cultural habits change how your product is used, and how might your product change cultural habits? Well, one of the concerns was that people might become private in public, maybe more isolated for using these augmented reality devices in a public setting. Less eye contact. It's changing literal physical behavior and physical mannerisms. And it was also thought that this augmented reality headset in the workplace could change the nature of how people collaborate. And that's a pretty foundational change to the workplace. Another team member got the card, the forgotten, who is excluded when you picture your user base. And there's a concern that with augmented reality headsets that the blind might not be able to use this product. And what the tarot cards help you do is, beyond thinking of these potential answers to these questions, you can also start to combine the implications that are coming together. So if you're transforming collaboration in the workplace, but you're blocking out the blind from that activity, are you making it that much harder for the blind to participate in work, in the modern workplace and workforce? That's one example of an output from this collaboration with our client using the tarot cards. Another output of the tarot cards exercise were a series of how might we statements, more targeted design goals for the team to work through. Here's one example. How might we help users remain socially present when their entire visual field is augmented? That's just something that the design teams will have to keep in mind, and it might be a tenet that a client would take forward even beyond our relationship with them. So to recap, the tarot cards have both a near-term and a lasting impact. Of course, the tarot cards are a useful exercise in the course of designing something, a product, a program, an initiative. We also want this to be more than just an exercise that you forget about 5 minutes later, but it's about a mindset. It's about a new way of thinking and adopting this outcome-focused mindset personally and applying that to your work overall. And in doing so collectively, aligning teams around outcomes, getting organizations to be more mindful of the potential impact that they have in the world. So while the tarot cards themselves are a very lightweight, accessible exercise, we hope that it is one of many potential interventions that can help organizations ultimately be more outcome focused. And you know, we're just one studio. We want others to adopt that outcome focused mindset as well. And we're already seeing a lot of success. You know, we have our colleagues in other organizations who talk about how wonderful these tarot cards are and how they plan to use those in their organizations. And we're also seeing an impact in schools as well, like in Western Washington University, students in the design program using tarot cards to inform their their capstone projects, I believe. And I'm told that they've actually pivoted, a few students pivoted their direction or made a more foundational change to their design based on the conversations that they had as a group with the tarot cards. So we're looking at an impact both organizationally on inside organizations, but also in the method of design itself.
And this is exactly what your workshops should look like.
I wish mine were always outside like this.
Sit in a circle on a grassy field, very relaxed, and make awesome decisions about the future of technology.
Anyway, we've been talking enough. I'm sure you have some questions for us. So we're going to throw it back to Hannah to host a bit of a Q&A. Thank you very much for paying us a visit.
Thank you, Jeff and Sheryl. Uh-oh, I'm getting an echo. Hang on. I think I'm getting a little bit of an echo. We're good? Okay, sorry, bear with me. First time. Okay, we got some really good questions in the chat. And I'm going to start with a question from Lauren, who asked, was there a specific event that inspired the creation of the cards, or was it more of a snowball effect in response to the current climate in tech?
Huh. Sheryl,
really good question, huh?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think it's, I would probably say it's more of the snowball effect in a way. We've been thinking about how to extend the design practice beyond just like direct users, direct benefit of use for over a year now. And this has been kind of a, yeah, I think this is basically one facet of our thinking. So earlier I was talking a little bit about outcomes-focused design. So we have other tools and methods that we use to kind of surface the right discussions about what are the outcomes going to be out in the world once your design work is done.
Yeah, and I think that like the snowball effect, like you mentioned, for a long time, for years, this concern of surveillance and data collection started as like a morbid joke, and as it became less and less funny, there's more and more of an impetus to actually do something about it. And I know since Artefact's founding, there's been this ambition to use design toward a preferable future. But yeah, there's been events that have kicked us into action more recently as well.
And in fact have been like validation of what we've been doing. So just to be clear, all of the data privacy stuff that's been happening now we were already developing this before all of that news broke, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is like much bigger than we even thought it was.
Yeah, yeah, but great question.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so we have a question that says, I can imagine if people are inexperienced, perhaps enthusiastic, and they use the cards, they might come away with an even more optimistic view about their product or experience. So how could we prevent the cards from actually causing an echo chamber from doing that kind of thing? Like, what are your guys' thoughts about how they're structured to prevent that kind of situation from happening?
That's right. I mean, that is a risk. There's the tarot cards were designed to be an introduction to this way of thinking and to get people excited, to get teams aligned about the possibilities and the possible consequences. There's definitely a lot of hard work that follows any discussion around these considerations. And I think I don't know if the tarot cards themselves keep you grounded in that reality, but it's the work that follows. It's the follow through.
So I think to kind of add to that, I think with any design tool, you can sort of tell yourself nice stories about you doing the right thing. You know, I've seen user testing misused and just basically used as confirmation bias. So any tool can be used in that way. If you're not open to thinking critically about what you're doing, then it's not like these are going to be your savior. But if you're open to the idea that these are going to introduce new ideas, and actually, like Jeff was saying, go do the follow through that's involved with, let's say, inclusive design becomes your focus. There's a lot of follow through that needs to happen after you've prompted that discussion.
Yeah, and I know that baking in, research insights or any other kind of point of view, it can be easily lost in any design program. And so it's a matter of, having strong design principles that the team is aligned around, and you're consistently going back to them, and that you do truly hold this perspective or principled approach with high regard and adhere to those.
Yep. Good question.
All right, our next question is, do you think these cards can be applied to smaller UX or UI teams? What tips or processes do you have for smaller web design teams on generating ideas and creativity?
I think in some ways they are designed for smaller UX or UI teams.
We are smaller teams.
We are small. What's small? Artefact is small but mighty. I think the idea is that you can use them at any level as long as you have a product or service idea that you're working on already. It's a good evaluative tool. Like, it's not like you have no ideas and this is meant to generate like product or service ideas. But if you have kind of something that you're thinking about, Jeff had a slide about how you use it when you have product or service ideas, and then also when you actually have products and services out in the world or are testing them.
Yeah, I'd say that the challenge might almost be the opposite when you have large organizations and you're trying to get buy-in around this way of thinking across a great many stakeholders with different values around their organization and their process. Organizational change is always hard, and tarot cards don't pretend to solve that challenge. But I think they're a tool to help expand that way of thinking throughout an organization. But that's where I see the greater challenge, actually.
And something I would just add about the generating creativity part is that I think as cute as the cards are, why they kind of work is that we spent so much time on the front end before they were even tarot cards coming up with the actual content on the back and how the questions are phrased, because it's so hard to go to a team of people and be like, let's think about the future of our product, or what could be some potential bad or good outcomes of this. Like, you're just going to draw a blank because it makes it so like nobody can answer that. So all of the questions are phrased in this kind of scenario-based way that brings you into that moment where you can actually begin to think it through. So a good example being, you could say, how could we make our product more environmentally friendly? And most people will be like, but if you say, if the environment was your client, what feedback would they have for you? It kind of helps you unjam that thinking. And then if you still kind of get stuck, if you're using these, there are smaller prompts beneath them that kind of break the larger top line question down into a way where you can start to generate ideas and kind of look at that big question from different angles. And we kind of made that with the idea that smaller teams or just any team would be using this and would need it to not make thinking more difficult, but to actually help them generate more ideas and unstick their thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the format is really important. Like, I had a client like say to me like, wow, like everything you think is like Black Mirror. And I'm like, well, that's not what I'm trying to do. And like, also I'm like, it's worthwhile to ask these kinds of questions. So these are almost like a little bit of a Trojan horse to get you to talk about important things, but in like a fun format.
Sheryl's like the most optimistic and cynical person I know around design, like simultaneously somehow. And I think that's sort of like the mindset that you need.
Yeah, that's what makes her great at it, I think, for sure. And that's actually a good lead into a question somebody had, which is like, hey, have you just encountered any hesitation? And I think like when working with clients or anybody in the tech industry, because obviously there is a really entrenched kind of perspective and a way of doing things. And I think when we made these, a huge part of the thinking was, initially we kicked around the idea of a white paper or something that was a little more traditional. I think the idea was, if you really are going to change hearts and minds here, you have to create kind of a non-judgmental space and make something accessible and fun that can kind of break down those walls inside on people on if they're going to approach these topics or not, and just kind of bring it back a step and make it something more accessible for people. So I think with the format, it wasn't just let's make something cute that's fun to look at. It was really, how do you make something that people actually want to use and can spark these conversations in like a non-judgmental way, I would say.
Yeah. And speaking to organizations, like how do you convince clients or organizations to adopt this kind of mindset and these values? Because some of the concerns are maybe fundamental to their business model, right? Maybe that's where the underlying challenge is. And as best as you can, you need to align, show organizations how their bottom line aligns with user needs, preferences, values, and societal values. So, for example, one of the tarot cards is the scandal, and it's about what is the worst headline you can imagine about your product. And I believe one of the sub questions is, how would users react if they found out how your business actually operates? And it's a matter of trust. And when that trust is broken, you could risk to losing users and revenue. And that's the line of thinking that is useful to persuade organizations to do the right thing.
Yep.
Okay, we're getting a couple questions along the lines of what phase in the design process would you recommend using these? I believe that, let me get the names right on this. The workshop crafting skills is asking, is it a quality check near the end of a project, or is it at the beginning? And Wendy asked, what part of the design process would you introduce the exercise? So I think it would be really great to get your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. I think there's actually a couple of places, right? So I don't think it's the tool for overall generating a product idea or a service idea. You should have at least an idea of what those things are first, and then these can be used to either help you continue to design for that idea, or used to help you understand what sort of scaffolding needs to exist around that product or service idea. So it might be that you have to accommodate other things like education, or I'm not sure, like there are so many different things that could help you kind of further your process and have a more ironed out idea of like how you're going to bring your product or service out into the world. And then you can use it again in thinking more specifically about features or about the shape that your product is going to take.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question from Priyam who's asked, do you think these, oops, I already asked that question. What were the key turning points or challenging moments during the process of making these cards?
Let's see. Well, Hannah alluded to a little bit about the process of making these cards. They originally were not tarot cards. They were not accessible. They are not interesting.
Yeah, we should probably just tell the story of how they came to be, just because it's like a fun, we had fun with it, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we were developing a set of tools because we're developing a method, an entire methodology really around outcome-focused design here at Artefact. And so we have several tools that help us think through challenges, not just the tarot cards. The tarot cards were born out of designing one particular tool that originally looked like a piece of paper where you draw a cone and it has essentially a question, what are the positive potential outcomes and what are the negative potential outcomes? And those are really hard questions to answer without any other kind of stimulating thought. And that's what the tarot cards were born from, were more stimulating questions, an array of questions that span many different possible consequences and industries and interventions to help us, really. It was originally an internal tool.
Right.
Help us better think of more useful answers to those questions, positive and negative implications. And then Hannah came along, found those questions, and had the idea to make them a lot more accessible through the tarot card wrapping, the formula, the visuals, the aesthetic, the entire concept that made it sticky, makes it more accessible. Because what we didn't want to do is pump out another white paper. So those were several challenges throughout the way as to how to make the stimuli the most inspiring, provocative questions, how to make them agnostic and versatile across industries. So it took a lot of refinement to make sure we had a representative set. And how do we make it sticky?
Yeah, I would say, oh, sorry, Sheryl, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the challenge we were given was like, how can you make like the exploding kittens of unintended consequences?
Yeah.
Yeah, we went to a meeting with our really smart white paper, and Cheryl's like, but what about exploding kittens for design? And I was like, we will think on this. And then kind of the tarot card, you should have seen Jeff's face when I showed up at our meeting, and I was like, here's an idea for you, the tarot cards of tech. And he was like, it was really funny, but he wasn't joking earlier when he said he loves thinking about this stuff in his own time, because he came up with some of the original prompts. He presented them just at an Artefact all hands meeting, and it was questions like the environmental question has actually been with us from the start, the one that's now on the Mother Nature card. And when he put these questions up there, I was like, we're on to something with these questions. These are really good. But I would say the trickiest part of them was we really held ourselves to an extremely high standard on coming up with those prompts, because there were just layers to it of like, we wanted to make sure that they would be agnostic to any kind of product. Like we say tech product, but it could be a platform, service, really anything. So when we put in product in any of the questions, it had to work in a variety of types of industries and businesses and that kind of thing. We had to think about actual issues. So it's not super clear in the deck, but if you go to the website version, something I'm really proud of is that there are 3 categories actually, where there are questions about scale and disruption, and there are 4 questions that relate to that. And that's a huge thing, because we also always think of disruption in this positive way, but as the Airbnb example shows, you really got to think through it about, the downsides of disruption as well, and your responsibility for that ripple effect you can cause should you be wildly successful. That would be amazing, but think through that. The other category is usage of, for so long designing for delight and engagement and all of this. What questions of usage should you ask? And then probably the one nearest and dearest to our hearts at Artefact is probably the questions of equity and access. So we made sure there was actually some rigor around making sure that each of these categories each had 4 questions in them, and that the questions and the sub-questions would kind of help people get their minds going without predisposing them to a certain answer. So we spent a couple of months locked in a conference room, Jeff and I, and then running back to Sheryl being like, what do you think? So that was kind of how they came together a little bit. Okay, let me see what our next question is. Someone submitted ahead of time, but they would like to know what your favorite tarot card is.
Sheryl, you want to go first?
You guys know what my favorite tarot card is. It is the Backstabber. So that one, I think that was one of like those clutch ones where you guys like had some prompts, and then we just like got into like a 90-minute sort of workshop together to kind of figure out what the character was going to be, and sort of fine-tuned it to be around trust, which I think is sort of the key to transparency, which is an issue that's near and dear to me in terms of the ways that I think our practice should evolve, is really prioritizing transparency. And by way of that, I think you can gain trust in not just your user base, but societally in terms of like how your company or organization functions.
It's hard to pick. There's so many good illustrations and everything. If I had to pick one, the Super Fan is one of my favorites. I think because I have in my life been immersed in many different like online communities, and I've seen firsthand what a rabid fan base can do for both
good and bad.
Good and bad, right? I've seen what can happen, and I've seen what can happen when organizations take more of an active or hands-off approach. There's a lot that goes into the creation of and management of a community. There's a lot of like philosophical questions around how you do so and how you don't, like levels of freedom that you allow. I think there's a lot of depth to that concept of community management, and so that's one of my favorites.
My favorite, and maybe I'm partial to it because I am a communications person. I come from a crisis communications background, waking up at 1 a.m. when something's gone terribly wrong. But mine is The Scandal. Look at this little cutie. And his is, what is the worst headline about your product that you can imagine? Because I think that makes you step back and to the point of transparency in this webinar, and the fact we've been talking about that, is if it isn't something you would be comfortable being out there in the light of day and in the papers, there is no amount of design or PR help that's going to help you. You really got to think about what you are comfortable with there. And again, we made these before some of the largest headlines you're probably thinking of in the technology industry, just because we were thinking about things like, uh-oh, kids fell off a cliff in Pokemon Go. Like, we can think these things through a little bit better. But this is probably my favorite because it really makes you think about transparency. And if you do that, you're probably going to save your PR people a little bit of help at the end of the day, and I'm partial to that. And we also got a question about, did you design these internally? And yes, everything about the tarot cards we made in here in Artefact, we kind of had this special little team going with Sheryl as kind of overseeing us on the thinking and that kind of thing. Jeff is being the driver on so much of the questions and coming up with that kind of thing. Me being the tarot card lady. And then we had two really special people I just want to shout out, which is the designer of these actual cards who made these illustrations. He hand drew them. It's pretty incredible, and he worked with us on the art for these. His name is Ponko, and he works here at Artefact. He works with our clients all the time. He does incredible work. And if you've seen the website version, that was developed pretty much single-handedly by someone here who works on client projects as well, named Sam Baker, who's a developer. So we kind of had this little team going. I also want to shout out Jasmine Whiting, who works with me. She's right over here. She doesn't want to cam on camera, but our webinar where you've talked to someone on social media, that's been Jasmine. So we just had a little team, and they kind of came out of that, and that's pretty cool. So Pongo is the guy who designed these for the person who asked that question.
Yep.
Okay, our next question is, How can we better reward and amplify companies that get it right rather than just criticize those who get it wrong? Can you share examples of design workarounds inspired by this type of thinking?
Yeah, so I really like that question because I think I don't think doing this type of work is just about criticizing organizations that get it wrong. I think it's actually equally about amplifying organizations who get it right. So if you're using these in practice, I think it would actually serve you pretty well to kind of take the prompts that you're most interested in and try to find examples where people are doing it right. So for example, if I were thinking about, let's see, something about inclusion, like inclusive design at Microsoft, for example, is an organization that's really getting it right when it comes to that issue. And so I'd find examples from an organization like that about how they're doing it right. There's lots of, I think, tech companies and design companies that are making some really good decisions that you could actually just take the tarot cards and look at what they're doing to kind of address issues as they stand. I think one of the key questions I've gotten from other technologists and designers since working on this and also working on outcomes focused design is, but we can't anticipate everything. Like, how do you expect us to anticipate unintended consequences? We can't do it. And I guess my challenge is like, well, I think we need to treat our practice more like, let's say, building infrastructure or what have you. You can actually anticipate risk. You can't, it's true that you can't anticipate every single way any bad actor is going to use your product. But I think oftentimes we can if we just ask ourselves the right questions. And so, yeah, I don't think this is just about criticizing organizations that are getting it wrong. I think it's actually just trying to make us all better as organizations.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, Sheryl mentioned inclusive design at Microsoft. They have a great set of materials that are freely accessible online around inclusive design. The short of it is, with inclusive design, you look to understand the extremes of your users, with theory being that if you can make your product work for the outside, the very fringe, the extreme cases, then it would also be good for everybody else in between. And so then you're making your design truly inclusive of everyone.
So here's the card to use for thinking about inclusive design.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to end it with a really good one. What is the most difficult challenge for you with regards to building trustworthy products? And what advice do you have to overcome such challenges?
For me, I'll let Jeff talk in a minute, but like for me, it's the issue that I just brought up, which is I feel like there's some resistance from technologists about sort of thinking things through instead of just like releasing things out into the world and just seeing what happens. I think there's so many smart people in tech, and if we just like stop to think about certain things for a minute, we can actually design better products that are better for your business and better for your users, and then ultimately better for society without having all of these implications surface. It just takes like just a little bit more thought and a different mindset. So I think that's the challenge. If we can sort of break through that resistance, you actually challenge yourself to design better things.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that. That sounds good.
What?
Wow, she nailed it, huh? Yeah. Okay, well, I think that was our last question today. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Like I said, it was our first webinar, and it was kind of a grand experiment. And it really means a lot to us that you took some time out of your day to listen to thick these cards are. They're going to last forever. Support our sale of the limited edition deck because all the proceeds go to STEM kids, and the link is in the YouTube. Jeff and Sheryl, anything you want to say before we head out?
No, just thank you very much for tuning in. I'd be curious to see and hear about how you all use tarot cards in your work. Anything that we can do to improve this set, expand upon this set, or anything that we can learn from you about how you've used them. I'd just be very curious to hear.
Yeah, and you can reach out to either of us. We're on our website if you're looking for trying to find us. I'm on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.